Beloved soul, take a peaceful moment for yourself right now. Breathe slowly and gently. Let the tension leave your body and allow yourself to settle fully into this moment. Because what has been placed before your eyes today did not arrive by random chance. Heaven itself has guided your steps toward this message at this exact moment in your life. Something powerful and meaningful is shifting around you right now, even if you cannot clearly recognize it yet.
It may appear completely quiet on the outside, almost impossible for your physical eyes to notice, yet the angels are making it clear that what is unfolding underneath the surface carries much more importance and power than anything you can presently see or understand. There are movements happening in the unseen parts of this situation, and sometimes the greatest changes begin in silence before they ever become visible in the physical world.
If you want to know the deeper truth about what really happens when you finally stop chasing, hit like right now. You did not fight anymore. You did not beg for attention. You did not send one last emotional message trying to explain yourself, prove your intentions, or justify exactly where you stood. You simply stopped. You stopped chasing, and you stopped pouring your precious energy into someone who had become completely comfortable receiving it without returning that same energy to you.
And beloved, in that one quiet and brave decision, something ancient and deeply spiritual was put into motion, something you may not completely understand yet. The person who once felt absolutely certain that you would always be there is now standing inside a silence that feels unfamiliar to them. They were not prepared for this new reality. The warmth you offered so freely, the attention you gave so consistently, and the emotional presence you made available without hesitation have now been pulled back.
All of it has been removed, not through an argument, not through a confrontation, not through unnecessary drama, but through complete absence. And beloved, absence has a kind of emotional and spiritual power that words can never reproduce. Sometimes silence communicates more clearly than 1,000 explanations ever could. Sometimes stepping back says what repeated conversations were never able to say. Right now, whether you can clearly see it or not, they are thinking. They are reflecting. They are questioning things within themselves and experiencing emotions they never expected to experience. For perhaps the first time, they are encountering the reality of you without your constant effort holding everything together between you. They are seeing what remains when you are no longer doing all the reaching, all the explaining, all the waiting, and all the repairing. That single reality changes the entire dynamic that existed before.
When you stop chasing someone, the change that takes place is not always loud, obvious, or dramatic. In fact, it can be incredibly quiet, but it can still be deeply real, both spiritually and psychologically. Before this moment, the connection may have been sustained largely by your effort, your messages, your emotional availability, your patience, and your willingness to continue showing up. Your energy was constantly moving toward them, creating a one-sided momentum that kept the relationship or connection moving, even when their own effort was limited. That constant momentum placed them in a position of emotional comfort. They did not have to stop and examine what they were doing because your continued presence made it possible for them to remain comfortable. They did not have to make a clear decision about what they truly wanted. They did not have to honestly examine the depth of their feelings. They did not have to confront what they genuinely desired from this connection because your effort was already filling the empty spaces. Your energy was answering questions before they even had enough silence to ask themselves those questions. God designed the human heart to seek, to pursue, to choose, and to make genuine decisions. But when one person does all of the seeking and all of the pursuing for both people, the other person loses the opportunity to experience the process that creates authentic and lasting commitment. They can remain inside the connection without truly contributing to it. They can enjoy the comfort without carrying the responsibility. They were existing within the connection without giving equally. And a connection that survives only because one person is constantly sustaining it
is not a true covenant. It becomes a convenience. It becomes something one person carries while the other simply receives. That is why your decision to stop matters more than you may realize. Comment the word "stopped" if you finally stopped chasing and noticed something change inside you. The moment you stopped, that old dynamic began to weaken. It was not because you created chaos. It was not because you tried to punish them. It was not because you forced a bitter confrontation or attempted to make them jealous. It happened because you withdrew the force that had been keeping an unhealthy imbalance alive. That imbalance was never supposed to continue forever. What once seemed stable and completely predictable to them now feels uncertain. What once felt guaranteed now feels unfamiliar. The person who had become accustomed to knowing that you would reach out may now be wondering why you are not doing it. The person who expected your attention may now be noticing the silence. The person who assumed your emotional availability would always be there may now be forced to recognize that your presence was never something they were entitled to. The human spirit, just as God created it, does not feel comfortable with uncertainty when something meaningful appears to be at genuine risk. When a person believes something will always remain available, they can easily stop appreciating its value. But when that same thing suddenly becomes uncertain, their awareness can become sharper. They begin noticing details they previously ignored. Proverbs 4:23 tells us that above all else, we should guard our hearts, because everything we do flows from within that place. Beloved, when you stopped chasing, you began protecting your heart. You began placing a boundary around the energy, attention, and love that you had been giving away so freely. And when you did that, heaven began doing what only heaven can do. It began revealing the truth. The truth is that before your silence, their attention may have been completely passive. They received your energy without feeling a strong reason to return the same effort. They had become confident that your continued effort would always bridge whatever distance existed between you. They could remain quiet because they believed you would eventually speak. They could delay because they believed you would continue waiting. They could become distant because they believed you would eventually close the distance yourself. Your predictability had become their comfort zone. You had become a constant in their world, something they did not have to question because they assumed it would remain there. They may not have consciously intended to take you for granted, but repeated availability can sometimes create exactly that pattern. People can become accustomed to what they receive regularly until they no longer recognize how valuable it actually is. But now your absence has made their attention active. For the first time, they are noticing the empty space. This is not simply coincidence, beloved. It can become part of a deeper divine process. The human mind naturally becomes accustomed to what is continuously available. Something that is always present can fade into the background of awareness. But the moment that presence is withdrawn, the mind becomes alert. Your silence interrupted their expectations. It created an open space where quiet questions could finally begin forming. They may be replaying old conversations. They may be remembering moments they previously dismissed. They may be wondering when exactly things began to change. They may be asking themselves whether they misunderstood your patience, whether they pushed too far, or whether they assumed you would always remain available no matter how little they gave back. And this is where the deeper transformation begins. God can use disrupted certainty to awaken a heart that had become comfortable through complacency. When everything feels guaranteed, reflection often becomes unnecessary. But when certainty disappears, a person is sometimes forced to look inward. 1 Corinthians 14:33 reminds us that God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. The confusion they may now feel is not necessarily something God created. It can be the result of an imbalance that had been allowed to exist for too long. When you were doing all the reaching, there was no reason for them to confront the imbalance. When you became still,
the imbalance became visible.
By chasing them for so long, you were carrying a weight that was never meant to belong entirely to you. You were trying to maintain something that required two people. You were attempting to keep alive something that needed mutual effort. You were making space for someone who was not consistently making space for you. But now your stillness has made that imbalance impossible to ignore. The connection suddenly requires investment and initiative from them, and that may feel deeply uncomfortable because they are no longer able to depend upon your constant movement. If they want the connection to continue, they now have to decide whether they are willing to move toward you themselves. Your attention once acted like a mirror, constantly reflecting their importance, even when they were not doing much to demonstrate that same importance toward you. Your messages, your concern, your patience, your questions, and your continued presence told them, again and again, that they mattered to you. But now the mirror is gone. And without that mirror, they may have to face the uncomfortable reality of what they had taken for granted. Psalm 37:23 says that the steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord. Your step towards stillness may have been ordered by God so that you could finally stop forcing what was never meant to be forced. Sometimes God does not answer us by bringing something closer. Sometimes the answer comes by teaching us to step back and become still. Stillness is not weakness. Silence is not defeat. Walking away from the chase does not mean you stopped caring. It means you finally recognize that caring for someone should never require abandoning yourself. Love should not demand that you continuously prove your value. Genuine connection should not require you to repeatedly convince another person that you deserve attention, honesty, respect, or consistency. When you stopped chasing, you gave them something they had not previously been given: the responsibility to choose. Now they have to decide what your presence actually meant to them. They have to determine whether they miss you or simply miss the attention you gave them. They have to look at their own heart and distinguish between genuine love and the comfort of being pursued. And that distinction is extremely important because when you were constantly present, they did not have to know the answer. Your effort protected them from having to discover it. Your silence removes that protection. Now the question is no longer, will you come back? The deeper question becomes, what will they do now that you are no longer chasing? That is where their true intentions can begin to reveal themselves. They may initially tell themselves that nothing has changed. They may try to remain busy. They may convince themselves that they are completely fine. They may even expect you to eventually return to your old pattern. But as time passes, the absence can become harder to ignore. They may remember your voice. They may remember the way you used to check on them. They may remember the conversations that once seemed ordinary. They may remember how easily you gave them your attention. They may remember that there was someone who genuinely cared. And memories often become louder when the person connected to them is no longer constantly present. This is why your silence can create reflection. Not because silence is a manipulation tactic, but because silence removes distractions. It leaves people alone with their own thoughts. When you were constantly reaching out, they could respond to your actions instead of examining their own. Now there is nothing for them to react to except the reality inside themselves. And beloved, that is where the deepest work happens. You cannot force someone to recognize your value. You cannot argue someone into appreciating you. You cannot send enough messages to create genuine desire. You cannot give enough love to make someone ready. You cannot chase someone into becoming emotionally responsible. But you can step back. You can become still. You can protect your heart. You can allow God to reveal what you could never force through your own effort. And when you do this, something changes inside you as well. You begin to realize that your worth was never determined by whether this person responded. Your value was never dependent upon how quickly they returned your message. Your importance was never measured by how much attention they gave you. You were valuable before they noticed you.
You were worthy before they chose you. You were deserving of love before they ever understood what they had in front of them. This is why stopping the chase is not simply about what happens to them. It is also about what happens inside you. You begin to recover your emotional energy. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. You begin to recognize how much of yourself you had been placing into a situation that was not giving you the same nourishment in return. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to understand the difference between love and pursuit. Love can be patient, but it should not require endless chasing. Love can forgive, but it should not require endless self-abandonment. Love can wait, but it should not force you to remain suspended forever while another person refuses to decide.
There is a point where faith means releasing control. There is a point where trust means stepping back. There is a point where obedience means allowing God to work without your constant interference. That point may be exactly where you are standing now. So do not panic because the silence feels strange. Do not rush to break it simply because the absence feels uncomfortable. Do not assume that because you cannot see movement, nothing is happening. Some of the most important things happen in places you cannot see. Seeds develop in darkness before they break through the soil. And sometimes, a person must experience the silence of your absence before they understand the value of your presence. Let time reveal what pressure could never reveal. Let their actions speak louder than your imagination. If they genuinely value the connection, their behavior will eventually need to reflect that realization. If they truly desire to rebuild something meaningful, they will have to participate in that rebuilding. They will have to move beyond thoughts and into action. And if they do not, then your silence has still served a purpose. It has protected you from continuing to pour yourself into something that was not equally sustaining you. That is why you should not view this season as punishment. View it as revelation. You are not being abandoned. You are being redirected toward truth.
You are not losing control. You are releasing control. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming discerning. You are not refusing to love. You are refusing to chase love where mutual effort is missing. And beloved soul, that distinction can change everything. The moment you stop trying to make someone choose you is the moment you become free to observe whether they would choose you without being pushed. The moment you stop explaining your worth is the moment you can see whether someone recognizes it naturally. The moment you stop carrying the entire connection is the moment you discover whether the other person is willing to carry their part. So remain still.
Remain prayerful. Remain grounded. Do not allow temporary silence to convince you that your decision was wrong.
Sometimes silence is exactly where clarity begins. Sometimes distance is exactly where truth becomes visible. Sometimes stopping is not the end of the story. Sometimes stopping is the moment the real story finally begins.
Reveal the truth.
Heaven is using your decision to stop chasing to bring powerful spiritual revelations into your life, beginning with the exposure of the imbalance. When you were giving everything you had, the unequal nature of the connection remained hidden beneath the weight of your constant effort. Now the truth is being laid completely bare. They are being forced to recognize how little they actually contributed, how many times you reached out, and how much of the emotional labor you carried almost entirely by yourself, creating an honesty that is necessary for true healing. Furthermore, this silence creates a stillness where buried emotions can rise more clearly, making them sit with their own thoughts and confront what they genuinely feel about you.
Finally, this becomes the ultimate test of initiative. The responsibility for moving this connection forward now rests completely on their shoulders, and the choice they make will reveal their true character, because someone who genuinely values you will not simply allow the silence to continue forever. The fourth way is through the revealing of emotional and spiritual maturity. Not everyone responds to absence in exactly the same manner,
and the way someone responds to your silence reveals the real depth of their emotional and spiritual maturity in a way that very little else can. A person who is truly capable of real covenant love will not respond defensively to your withdrawal. They will sit with the discomfort that it creates. They will honestly examine their own behavior instead of hiding behind pride. They will ask themselves difficult questions and have the courage to face answers they may not want to hear.
But a person who is not yet emotionally mature will resist this process completely. They may distance themselves even further simply to protect their fragile sense of pride. They may attempt to convince themselves that the connection was never as important as it seemed when you were fully present in their life. They may sit back and wait for you to return to your old patterns, instead of rising to meet this moment with the courage that genuine growth demands. Their response, beloved, is one of the clearest signs heaven may use to show you whether this person is truly prepared for the kind of deep, meaningful love God is leading you toward in this season of your life. The fifth way is through the revealing of their genuine feelings. Your constant presence may have been keeping emotions alive within them that were partly supported by your energy, your attention, and your effort, rather than by a truly genuine and independent depth of feeling from their side. But your absence removes that outside influence completely. What remains is the honest truth of what they feel about you, entirely separate from anything you are doing or choosing not to do. If their feelings for you are truly real, the absence of your presence will cause those feelings to become stronger. They will start to miss you, not simply as a comfortable habit or as someone who is always available, but as a specific and irreplaceable person. They will begin to understand what your presence actually meant in their life, in ways they never took enough time to recognize or appreciate before. They may remember your words, your care, your patience, your support, and the little things you did that once seemed ordinary to them. Things they barely noticed when you were constantly there may suddenly become very meaningful when your presence is no longer available in the same way. But if their feelings were shallow, if those feelings were being sustained more by the comfort of your availability than by a genuine and deep connection, that truth will also become visible through the silence. Either outcome, beloved, is a real gift. Truth, even when it hurts to accept, is always better than a comforting illusion that keeps you attached to a place where you were never truly meant to stay. Sometimes the answer you receive is not the answer you hoped for, but it is still the answer that protects your future. The sixth way is through the activation of spiritual clarity within you. Beloved, this is something the angels want you to hold very closely within your spirit. The silence you have chosen is not only affecting them, it is also working inside you in ways that may be just as important, if not even more important. It is creating room for God to speak directly to your spirit without the constant noise of emotional striving, anxiety, and overthinking that may have occupied that space for such a long time. When you stop sending all of your energy outward towards someone who is not meeting you where you are, that energy slowly begins to return to you. God can use that restored energy to heal the parts of you that have been quietly drained over time, to strengthen your spiritual discernment, and to prepare your heart for what is genuinely and truly ahead. You begin to see things differently. You start noticing patterns that you could not see while you were emotionally overwhelmed. You begin to understand the difference between love and attachment, between patience and chasing, between